Today on the show, we're talking about the Camp Film Fest.
It's a brand new film festival created by a group of creators in Austin, Texas, in partnership with Patreon, featuring 9 first-time directors making their first films.
We also look at an interview we had with 2 of the founders of the film festival, Max and Simon. My name is Mia.
My name is Paul.
We both live and work on the internet.
But the internet feels too big.
It's hard to find things that are meaningful when there's just a mountain of content out there.
So we're sharing a few things each week that we find interesting, inspiring, or meaningful to us.
And maybe one of those things will inspire your next project.
Or maybe you'll find your next favorite creator.
This is Gems of the Internet. Hey guys, we just got back from Austin, Texas, which was a super fun work trip.
We went for the Camp Film Festival, which was this is the first time they've ever done this, and I was a little nervous. Like I didn't know
I
what
also
to
was a little
accept.
nervous.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think everyone was kind of like on edge a bit. It was like there's just like so much prep that went into it,
Yeah.
and it was it wasn't a small thing. It was like
There's a lot of people involved, a lot of focused effort towards this one weekend.
yes, yeah, and there was a lot of sort of like unknowns, like are the films going to be good? Are people going to show up?
So Camp Film Fest is a film festival that was put on by Creator Camp.
It's basically a group of friends who felt like they didn't have the space like online, the community online to create things that were just art, and they created this thing called Creator Camp where they have these like meetings with creators and everyone like flies in and they all make stuff together. And the Camp Film Festival is sort of like, it's like the
Ethos. Well, their whole thing is like bringing the internet community into real life with those meetups like you mentioned.
Yeah. And the Camp Film Festival is specifically to get creators to make like Hollywood level shorts, and then they had one creator make a feature.
Yeah.
And it was like this whole idea of sort of like, how do we bridge the gap between the internet and Hollywood? And there's sort of a big thing that I think everyone a part of the company learned after the festival, and that's they didn't need a bridge. They are kind of just creating their own thing,
Right.
which we'll get into a bit later when we talk more about it.
So I was in Austin a week before you doing some work for Digital Spaghetti. We have these interviews that we conducted with all the filmmakers, just kind of getting into actually the 3 phases of pre-production, production, and post. And so
Cool.
by now, those will already all have been out on YouTube. You can watch them in full on our Patreon page, patreon.com/digitalspaghetti. That was the first time I think that they were reflecting on their journey, and they only had 100 days to put these films together. From ideation to scripting to filming with a crew for the first time, editing.
Yeah.
So I was also there to conduct an interview with the founders of Creator Camp, Max and Simon. There are a couple other people too, like Chris Duncan and Christina involved.
What was the energy like? Like, how did it feel? Did it feel like things were running smoothly?
It felt kind of similar to like leading up to finals week in college, if that makes sense. Like everyone was just kind of trying to get their work done, but like excited to have it be shown, but also scared and nervous, which I think us on the Patreon side, we also were a little like scared and nervous, but excited to have everyone finally arrive in person together. I was like excited to go. I was like nervous because I just didn't know what to expect, and like I'd never been to a thing like this before, so I was just sort of like taking it all in. You also worked on a video that played at the festival. Yes.
Like,
so I've been in the thick of it.
Yeah.
But in a fun way. I think. Yeah.
They had a bunch of like ads that played before each like sort of session of shorts. That I think there was like 4 or 5 sessions where everyone was in the theater watching the films, and you know there was like a Spotify ad and like a Notion ad.
There's a great Dot Store ad by Sky. Yeah, I really like that one where he was painting the different URLs.
But a part of that sort of like the beginning was this Anthem video, and it really kind of like set the tone for the entire like festival.
If all it took to be good was to have the right equipment, the people who had the most money would always win.
60, 70 years now, 4 companies have controlled, pretty much all of media.
How did it feel for you to see something that you worked on like on the screen? Because you were a pretty important like role on this, right? Like you.
Yeah.
What did you do?
I can't take too much credit.
Yeah.
Dodford literally edited the whole thing and did the crazy like VFX and sound and everything. I helped him as like a researcher and story producer. So we had worked together, I think 2 years ago now, on a couple of his like mini documentaries. If you guys aren't familiar with his style, he does these crazy like super dense archival looks into celebrities from Hollywood and TV. So he has a really great like Adam Sandler piece and Quentin Tarantino one and Greta Gerwig that I helped work on.
Oh, really?
But yeah, so Patreon was working with Creator Camp on creating a video that best like captured the moment we were in and kind of why the festival existed.
So like seeing it in like the theater, like you felt like
crazy. Yeah. I'm in talking with you before we recorded. I somehow didn't realize that I was also in the group of people who was having their work be shown on the screen. And I do remember like being excited and stuff. I think at the time, like I had a bunch of other work to get through. So I'm glad that I kind of like, once we got to the theater, I was like, okay, like I need to appreciate this moment. I need to like maybe film it on my phone for my mom to see later. And like, maybe people will applaud and cheer. I don't know like what the vibe is going to be, but yeah, the anticipation of hoping that an audience feels emotion at the points that you want them to, if that makes sense, which I'm sure like all the filmmakers involved felt that like to an even greater degree. But watching it back, like Dodford is such a master of editing that I knew we had hit our goal when I was like feeling excited or feeling like like Hollywood does need a change. It
was so good. And I really like felt, I think the biggest thing that I was like looking forward to was being in a room with people, watching stuff from people that typically just put stuff up on the internet. Because it's such a rare experience to be in the same room with even more than like 4 people, like to watch anything that's like online or comes from someone who posts online.
And even when you share like a YouTube video with your friend, it's always over a digital. You're rarely like, come watch this.
And someone said this at the film festival in like the first day, but it's like, if you're a creator and you know you're used to posting things and they get like thousands, maybe hundreds, maybe millions of views, like you kind of use that number as like a gauge of being like my success. And it's
dehumanizing a little.
Like if you have like a lower number, you're used to higher numbers, like bigger numbers. But these creators, like they're in a room that has 1,000 people in it. If the same video,
insane.
But it's like if that same video only got 1,000 views on the internet, they'd be like, what a flop. Like no one cares. But when you're in the room with that amount of people, like it's so like the energy
like
and
I
it really
coming back to that word.
And it sounds so cliche to say that, but it seriously did feel electric.
It's like buzzing with people.
You were able to talk with 2 of the guys that like kind of were part of creating the whole thing.
Max and Simon. So we have a couple of moments from that interview that we want to watch through and talk about.
Let's get into it.
So Creator Camp, basically 4 or 5 years ago, I'd been creating videos on YouTube and Max had as well. And it was like a low point in my own life because I had taken a gap year from college and kind of was stuck in this small town in Michigan making videos, like trying to make it work out in my, mom's basement, the typical thing. And it was during that time that we started a Discord chat, which was essentially just like an accountability chat, because, we had seen other people. And in that group chat was like me, Max, Natalie, Lynn, Dallas Fire Family, a few other people who were kind of making similar stuff.
Was the chat kind of like the start of new wave kind of culture?
Yeah, sort of like that sort of idea of just like, hey, like we need friends who do the same thing as we do that like kind of share similar values. And so that's kind of where Creator Camp was formed, was through that Discord and those calls and the feeling of like, okay, like none of us are getting the college experience or something more traditional. Like let's go out and meet together and like, build a community ourselves. So
for sure.
That's kind of where it came
from. So you've
from.
always been kind of making a space for yourself from the very beginning.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like Simon is always the community builder. And then we're like, how do we take this in person? And then we lived in Montana for a month, and then that kind of led to the next like official Creator Camp, because that was what we called it, the Wholesome House.
Yeah. So Wholesome House. And it was basically like 5 years ago, we're like, yo, right now, like there are these like hype houses in LA. There are like these things going on. It's like, no, let's do our like Walden-esque, go in the middle of the woods, talk about like art and be all pretentious. And that's kind of what it was.
It's just so cool to me that they started a community online on Discord, and that's a group chat basically, and then they all were like, what if we just did something together
in real life,
which
is crazy,
but also like in this way that's like not just like come over, it's like let's go to Montana live
there for a month. I feel like the heavy like nature experience was a big part of like them being wholesome and kind of being there for each other rather than like an LA hype house type thing.
Yeah, it feels like from the beginning their motivations were just to make art and just have fun with people that they like working with, and that's it. It wasn't like, let's make content in like an influencer house, like a content house or like a hype house or whatever. Yeah, like that wasn't their intention. They were like, let's do something that's more meaningful.
It makes me think of how the YouTube New Wave like style kind of came about from these outlier people, but like the ethos of them is what kind of created the style. They weren't necessarily like copying each other, but it was like, how can we get our message across in like a calmer way, more slower editing, like artful cinematic pieces. And because they kind of, from my experience as like a YouTube viewer, they kind of all sprouted up around the same time, and it felt like a reaction to beastification.
Okay, so you just used the word beastification, which I understand, but I don't think I've heard that before.
Oh, it's all over, Paul. Yeah.
And that's like relating to Mr. Beast, obviously, and how his videos are so like edited for retention, and like there's a million cuts in the first like 30 seconds, and like that's kind of and this is the antithesis of that. This is like slow pacing. We're in nature. We have beautiful shots of trees and road trips and just vibes.
Getting to know friends in Montana. Kind of the idea behind content versus art, and not to say that like one is bad and one is good, but just like one is more playing to the algorithm and the platform and trying to get as many views as possible versus like one is happy with just creating depth with like a smaller group of people but having like more connection basically.
And that feels like that's a very important part of Creator Camp. The Camp Film Festival is like the friends and the people. And in this interview, Simon talks about how they really just wanted to uplift like their most kind of creative friends. He was like, well, actually, let's listen to it.
I'm assuming you've been shouting from the rooftops how creative your friends are, and there's nothing better than like them getting the recognition that you know they've deserved.
Yeah. Exactly. There was a point where like I think I met Natalie. I went on a road trip with her, and then I like met Aiden and them, and I was like, because I had been making videos, and I was like, I'm pretty good at this. But when I started to meet them, I was like, okay, you guys take this and run with it, and you represent all of us because you guys are so capable. And I think, that's the best feeling ever of like now my role and Max's role in the same light. Like we had created a lot of stuff on YouTube where like actually find way more fulfillment in like giving other people the resources to take this further than we could have personally.
I love that. Obviously, like Max and Simon are still wanting to express themselves through video and like make their own work online, but I can see exactly how gratifying it must be to find friends more talented than you and just give them whatever they need in order to keep making their work.
I feel like that is a very mature way of looking at it, because I think that a lot of people that create online, they get just so used to making things in a vacuum, like on their own, and like having the foresight to be like, look, I like doing this, I'm getting better at it, but my friends are even better than I am. What if we all work together? And it's not like a competition. We're not like competing for views or anything. Like Simon, to be able to say that and like think that is really cool and smart. And I think that being the driving force behind Creator Camp is huge.
It does feel like that's the ethos behind the film festival.
Yes. These guys are in like their early 20s. And if this is what the future generation, like, it's not even like
they all dropped out of college.
Right.
And
they really like found their community of people online and then brought them into the real world.
I think that's the biggest thing, because we talk about like even just trying to get people from YouTube onto like a Patreon, like just a different digital space, but getting them actually like to leave the house is props to them, because it's harder than it looks.
That really felt like maybe the biggest challenge of the festival, to get people in real life, like from the internet out into a real space. And like they were doing these kind of vlogs on their YouTube channel leading up to the festival, and at the end of each one they would have like a little graphic that would say how many tickets they've
Oh,
sold.
yes. Yeah.
And for a while, they weren't even like at like 200 or 300 tickets.
Yeah, it was like 250.
Yeah, they were trying to do 1,200 tickets. So they even say, they're like, we weren't sure if people were going to show up to this. Like, we like did. And that was the thing I was thinking about. I was like, what if this is a big flop? Like, it's hard to get butts in seats. Like, that's like, and they also like the ticket prices were really expensive.
Yeah, I think the lowest was around 200
or
something. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a lot. They did have a big push, a discount for the tickets leading up to it. And I think that helped a lot of people like come to it. But this one sort of phrase that they use a lot in their vlogs and just like how they talk about things is this idea of delusional optimism. And for me, like hearing that, you're kind of like, okay, this sounds like a little naive. Like, is this just like a result of like kids that maybe don't know what they're doing? And like a part of me is maybe just like, I'm like, I feel like I'm striving to not be delusionally optimistic about anything. Like, I don't want to be delusional. I do want to be optimistic, but both.
It feels self-aware that they included the delusional part.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that self-awareness is huge for these guys. Like they know exactly what they're trying to do and who they are and how to do it. But they're learning as they go. Like there was like some flaws and things, I'm sure, and like I'm sure they learned a lot. But yeah, the delusional optimism is a funny term. My big question for them is sort of like, what's the core like meaning of the festival? Like, what's like the end goal?
Yeah. What is success?
Yeah. They talk a little bit about this in the interview.
Should we watch?
Let's watch it.
Which I feel like has been like the core sort of ethos behind everything is like we met online, but then how do we use the internet as a tool to like connect us and bring people together? Because when we live together, that's what like really resonated and has like left that feeling, and that I feel like has been core to like all the events we've done, even though they're like most of them have been with like 20 people. That like impact and like compounding effect is like been all the magic that we've been able to make so far.
My like big takeaway from going to the festival was getting to meet a lot of creators and like talk to them and hang out and just like sort of like talk about social media, like work related things, but also just talk about like life stuff and be like, what's going on? Like, like, and like how some of these creators deal with fame, like that. Like I had like an interesting conversation with Elle Mills about this. A lot of these people were swarmed with fans when at events,
Cheesy
like
Kane and Elle Mills and Natalie, just walking around. Egox, everyone wants to be Egox in front of the theater.
Everyone, and that must be really cool for them to see, but also I'm like, how do you deal with that? Like that you're so used to just being online and like maybe you see a few comments and likes and that's it. Very
different from being an actor or something where you're kind of signing up for fame versus just making videos in your bedroom.
And it's, I think that like for me, talking to people and like just feeling the energy, it's like my big takeaway was, if we're all feeling this now, we need to like continue the momentum and create something out of this. I said this to a lot of creators. I was like, if we're all feeling this electric energy, right, and we're like collecting people's Instagrams and chatting about ideas and projects, if we don't act on this, it's going to be kind of a flop. This isn't going to be like what you needed to take away from the festival. I think like sure, the films were great and like that whole thing, but like that energy, like that like inspiration, there's a potential that we could see like an explosion of people creating things online. That reminds me, one of Simon's he said one of his wins was just seeing people in the Creator Camp Film Festival Discord that they set up and like joining, like they were all living at the hostel in Austin together, and he mentioned that the festival will be a success either way, no matter the ticket sales, just because there's seeds planted of new creative projects, and the outliers are like two random people who met at the festival in person who might go on to direct an amazing feature film in like 2 years. So when I was interviewing Max and Simon, they brought up a really great metaphor for describing the Camp Film Festival. They mentioned that it was thought of at first as a bridge between Hollywood and the internet, but then it changed over time.
When we set out to do the fest, a lot of like the copy that we used was like, we're building a bridge from the internet to Hollywood. And then that sort of evolved from, let's just bring the internet to the big screen, and like, do we actually need to prove that other creators can do what Wesley and Kane did, is that what success looks like for us?
Yeah, exactly.
Or is it a much bigger thing?
Yeah.
And like we were talking about, are we building a bridge or are we building an entirely new highway? And like that was something that we got excited about. And like to the like Kevin Kelly 1,000 true fans, like look at the people showing up. That's something that like Hollywood has always had like control over, like the distribution, getting to have stuff put into theaters, and like having a different viewing experience that allows for more value to be captured, where if you just put content on the internet, it becomes commodified, and then you make, a fraction of a penny off 1,000 views. And I think that kind of contributes to the economic model that then changes the incentives, that allows people to invest more into the work to make longer stuff.
Yeah.
And like getting that right, I think, starts to shift things, and that's where it got exciting for us.
Yeah,
with
we were like midway through, and we're saying like building a bridge to Hollywood, and then it got mad depressing at a certain point, because we're like, wait a second, like, okay, if this really goes well, like these guys will get an A24 deal and do all this stuff, and then maybe in like 2 years, maybe it'll get greenlit by some executive and that sort of thing, and we're realizing like,
and maybe we won't even get theatrical, and then it's like maybe it goes on a streaming platform, and then it's like 5 years go by.
You become a cog in this machine that is kind of depressing. Rather, can you just skip that whole process?
Yeah, skip the gatekeepers.
And so that's kind of where we're learning in real time of like, we launched this thing of like building a bridge to Hollywood. Wait, hold on, like that it might be a completely different thing.
Listening to them talk about that, it makes me think about like, what is Hollywood? What are they thinking Hollywood is?
I think traditional theatrical releases, right?
I think that's kind of where they ended up. It's almost like they reverse engineered it to get back to that, because ultimately, if you're selling tickets to get people in the theater, and that's Hollywood, then you don't really need Hollywood. Like, there's theaters all over the world. You can just talk directly to the theaters. I think that what they're saying like Hollywood is like the connections with like the distribution that gets films into theaters. But ultimately, maybe we can cut out the middleman, Hollywood being the middleman, and just go right to the theaters. Or maybe there's some other thing that exists that with like the internet age, that you don't actually need these like studio execs to be like, this is going to be in like the theater. Like, ultimately, Hollywood studios are just like businesses that are designed to make money, but also like produce films and then distribute them. So it's like they're kind of doing what the studios are doing. They just don't have like the pedigree. But to me, that feels like they've really kind of reinvented what Hollywood can be. And what Simon says about being like a cog in the machine, it made me think about Damien Chazelle. Did you watch La La Land? Were you a fan of?
I did watch La La Land.
Okay, so
yes, I think about it every time I'm in traffic. Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
So that movie like felt like such like a, like, how did that slip through the cracks of Hollywood, right? Like, it was such like a passion project, and it felt like he could do whatever he wants after that. And then like his follow-up movie to that was kind of not that exciting. Like,
what
not
was his
that
follow-up?
It was called First Man, and it was like a sort of,
never seen it.
It was made to feel like a documentary, but like not really, with Ryan Gosling going to the moon as Neil Armstrong. Like, it was like cool, but it sort of feels like he just kind of got slotted back into this, like, you're a director that can do like good movies. Here's like this thing. And it just like, it's almost like things are better when they're scrappier. And I think that that's a huge kind of driving force for these Creator Camp filmmakers. They didn't have a huge budget. They were given money to produce their shorts and the feature, but it wasn't massive. And I think that things are better when budgets are smaller.
Yeah, I do think they think of Hollywood as the gatekeepers in terms of deciding like what even gets made. And part of what was successful about the Camp Film Fest is that the filmmakers were given like full creative control in terms of what ideas they were going to make.
Yeah. And I love that. I love that they just reached out to these creators. And I actually don't know how they picked these creators.
They got applications.
So people were applying to create something. Because the big difference between this and like a film festival like Sundance is you apply to be a creator to then create something specifically for the festival. You're not making a film, getting it all made, and then submitting that film to festivals to then hope that you get in and get screened. Like, I
do think, if I remember correctly, they position themselves as the Sundance for the internet age.
I've heard that. I've heard people say that,
which I think is a good comparison, right? Given the description.
it's cool because people know what Sundance is, but ultimately it's not run in the same way. So it is sort of like, are we just using that name because it's a film festival that people know about?
Maybe.
Yeah. And that's cool. Like, you can do that. But that is not how Sundance works as far as I'm concerned. I don't think people, I mean, I'm sure people are like making films to be like, I want to submit this into Sundance, but it's not that like Sundance is like, we want you to make a film for us.
Yeah. And then I think we also got into the interview, and we don't necessarily have to play the whole clip, but Max was just talking about they did receive applications, and they do have a production company leg of Camp Film Fest as well, Camp Studios. Cool. And so I'm really excited to see how that plays out in the future, and how maybe like you said, Scrappiness was part of what made the films good. If they do it again next year, are they going to have a brand new slate of filmmakers that have also never done this before?
Right. Yeah. And something that I heard on the Colin and Samir podcast, they talk with Max from the about the festival. I think it was Samir who was like, what if they paired up a Hollywood showrunner with a creator from the internet? Because
like a mentorship.
Yeah, and you have this sort of production arm that knows how to get a crew together and like manage the crew in a way that a young creator might not. But then the creator has all the creative ideas and the writing and can kind of help direct
just
things.
Removing the roadblocks.
Yeah, and that would be really interesting to sort of merge like those crew members together and see what would happen there. I do wonder, with the success of this first festival, are they going to get bigger budgets that might end up kind of bloating some future projects?
Right. Like, will it not feel as electric and scrappy and like, oh, they've never done this before?
Right.
Yeah. If the budgets get too big.
Because every film did have a layer of sort of YouTuber vibe. Like, it just sort of felt amateur in a really charming way.
Yeah. Well, not to get off too far of a tangent, but I think, and I don't speak Latin, I don't know etymology of words that well, but amateur is like, I think the root of the word is like lover of the thing. Like it comes from love. It's not necessarily that you're shitty at doing something. Cool. It's like you are just only doing it for the love of it. So I feel like that's a good description.
Wow, that's a really sweet little detail. That's okay. Did you research that?
I didn't research it ahead of time. I just haven't had it in my head.
That's nice. Yeah. I want to know from these guys, like, what do they think of the state of filmmaking right now? Because I feel like everyone has a different kind of perception of that. And like, if these guys don't know people in the industry, like what are they thinking?
Yeah. Where do they want to fit in?
Yeah.
Let's see.
What are your thoughts on like the state of filmmaking?
To be honest, like, we aren't like cinephiles, for example. Like personally, I felt a little imposter syndrome with doing this whole thing. We're like hosting a film fest, but I can't like name all these like classic movies or whatever. But we're just fans of like really great work that has kind of arisen from the internet. I think the most fascinating thing that we're seeing is like everyone in Hollywood or within this big machine like is like clearly there's something missing here, or like this can't go on, or something's a little bit broken, whether it's like the big budgets they're spending or whether it's like all this stuff. People have qualms about it and it's pretty commonly talked about. But on the other side, you have like this infinite stream of content where people like you and I and just like people who started in the bedroom are just creating incredible work, you know? And so for us, like the most interesting thing has been like there is clearly a dissonance here where there's like all this great work. And like we've broken down distribution online through like YouTube, and anyone can make a movie now. But the thing that hasn't been cracked necessarily is like the theatrical experience and people being in one place physically. And so that's what we find really fascinating. And that's sort of our DNA of like, we don't know exactly what is there. There are a lot of places where you can disrupt, like maybe on production costs are less or that sort of thing, or maybe like with the creator's distribution. But I think the like physical experience part is what we find really fascinating.
Simon talked about how the problem that they're cracking is getting butts in seats in the theater. I had an incredible time watching all the movies with everyone and kind of feeling the emotion together.
Yeah.
Do you want to give a brief blurb together about each movie that we saw in the theaters?
Let's do like a little speed round of each one of them.
Cool.
The first one that played was called How Long Until Now?
One of my favorites.
And it was a bit of a kind of dreamy,
surreal,
really cinematic, like really beautiful production design, music. It just felt like so...
Underwater shots too. I don't know how they did that.
Yeah. It felt very
dreamy, maybe.
It was so dreamy.
Yeah.
Like it was, and it opening up the festival with that was pretty cool. It's like we were like, whoa, okay, we're really getting into something.
Yeah, the caliber was like, this is actually a movie.
Yeah, and seeing on that big screen, there were so many beautiful shots in that.
Julian Petzel was great.
That one, they had a ton of setups for it, which is incredibly hard to do. There was so much dialogue, so much like
different
action.
Locations.
Yeah. In one word, how would you describe Julian Petzel?
Family.
Nice. Natural 20.
Loved it.
One of my favorites of the entire festival is a group of like Dungeons and Dragons kids that go on a quest both to get the scroll that they need to win the game, but then also win the main character's girlfriend back. Really funny, campy.
Superbad meets a little bit of Stranger Things with Dungeons and Dragons.
Yes, 100%.
They were art thieves. Very inspired by Good Will Hunting and Dead Poet Society. Yes. Beautiful.
Was that the one?
Yeah.
That could be the one word.
I mean, it could be.
Yeah.
Yeah. Love the lighting, the color grading. I don't know much about that, but yeah, I just felt thrown into the world of these two brothers.
It felt cinematic in an incredibly traditional way, which was awesome.
One word description?
Cinematic. Make No Change, made by Zach Shai. Incredibly like bold idea, kind of dramatic feeling. They shot on 16 millimeter.
I think the production design was really impressive.
Yes.
They did all of their VFX practically.
Yes.
So everything on the computer was actually playing.
One word to describe that movie.
Analog, because there's all these computers and wires, and that crazy hand that he built out of computer chips.
Yes. Yeah. And they shot it on film. Okay,
there you go.
There we
Perfect.
go.
So Return to Sender by Reciter was a sci-fi film, and one of the ones that was kind of VFX included.
Beautiful little story. It looked great. I think that one had the most sort of world building in it. Like you really felt like you were in a different universe.
It was more heartfelt than I expected.
Yeah.
The coworker friendship was unexpected. Like The Office, but in a dystopian future.
Yes.
What's one word that you would use to describe it?
Wholesome.
Yeah.
Ashes to Ashes.
Beautiful. Yeah.
That one, the sound design was incredible.
Do you know she did ADR for literally every sound?
What?
Yeah.
Wait.
Like she recreated every sound. There's no sound that was captured on set that she used.
Whoa.
Yeah.
That's pretty bold.
A lot of work.
The set design was amazing. I don't know where they got that house. It was awesome.
I think part of it was her house.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The bedroom. That's what I heard.
But very Lynchian, very dreamy again. Had a bit of a sci-fi like undertone.
That was a surprise, yeah, with the TV.
Yes, I would say Lynchian. That's
your one word.
That's the one word.
I would say unsettling, but in a good way.
Positively unsettling. Nice.
So Vis-a-Vis was Mamadou's film of a son and father stuck in an elevator, which I think is such a cool storytelling framework. Like you're forced to be vulnerable.
Yes. Yeah. And their relationship, like I feel like really kind of highlights the relationship between a lot of people who are children of immigrants in America.
Relatable. Yeah.
Yeah. You related to
it?
Yeah. That felt very cool. And it was just incredibly like cinematic. Again, all of these were so cinematic, but that one specifically, I love that there was black and white moments. I was hoping that someone was going to do something in black and white, and that one had black and white moments, which was awesome.
The ending moment of the family member stepping into the frame was breathtaking.
Beautiful, really beautiful. The big film of the festival, the feature, Two Sleepy People. What did you think about it?
I loved the writing. I didn't expect it to be so funny, and I loved the different locations. I don't want to give away too many spoilers either, but there's a storytelling framework where they're entering their own memories. Loved that part.
Yeah, it was awesome. It was giving sort of Eternal Sunshine. It had a lot of almost, again, David Lynch type vibe, like a little Severance kind of notes. Like so creative, so well written, so well edited. Everything just felt like it came together with that, and hearing about how they made it was incredible. Like there was so much that went into that. They didn't even see the whole film until it premiered.
No, like, really?
They
down
were,
to the wire?
Yeah, they were cutting each section. Every time it went to black, that was like a section.
Oh man.
They were cutting all of those individually, and then they put them all together.
They only had 100 days, so
it's incredible. Yeah. I talked to the editor on that. It was very, very cool.
I think my one word for that would be truthful, because Barron talked about writing, like the writing process with Caroline, and how she would interrogate each section, and if it didn't come from a truthful place, it would get cut. And I felt that.
It came from a place of reality. Those are all the films from the Camp Film Festival.
If you are having FOMO for not being at the festival, you can watch all of these videos online at the Creator Camp Patreon until June 5th.
If you want to see the full interview that Mia did with Max and Simon in Austin, Texas, it's going to be available in its entirety on the Patreon for Creators Patreon page.
Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time.